So this topic is going to be about the impact of exercise and physical therapy on Parkinson's disease. People who have been seen by me over the years know how I always talk about the importance of exercise, and I very frequently, if not invariably, recommend physical therapy. Physical therapy and exercise clearly has a beneficial effect in Parkinson's disease, and there are different reasons I can say this without any doubt. Number one is I get feedback from patients and from the caregivers and the family. They'll say, well, as long as they're receiving physical therapy, they're so much better. But once the physical therapy is done, that's determined by insurance companies and Medicare who don't want to pay for continuous physical therapy. If it was up to me, I would say physical therapy till you climb into your grave, because it's going to be beneficial all the time. Even if you didn't have Parkinson's disease, exercise and physical activities are not only good for the body and general health, but also for the mind and thinking. So I recommend it all the time. But rather than just saying, I recommend it, many physicians recommend it, physical therapists recommend it, I'm going to give you the evidence for why it works, the evidence that has been reported in the literature, and I'm not going to get too technical. And then I have a really interesting overview of all the different kinds of exercises that people can do that are recommended for Parkinson's disease. And guess what? You don't really need a physical therapist to do these exercises. The therapist will focus on certain specific features. For example, there's a lot of rigidity in the patient. They'll work on stretching out those muscles, loosening them. Gait and balance is really the biggest problem that I see in Parkinson's disease, and they will focus on gait and balance. But there's a lot of other exercises you could do that has a general benefit, and some that you should do, some that you should avoid, and I'll get over them. I found a really nice review of this on what types of exercise are best for people with Parkinson's disease. That's really what you want to hear. But in the meanwhile, what I'll do is, before I get into what kinds of exercises are best for Parkinson's disease, I wanted to read, there's a paper that I found that is called a systematic review and meta-analysis of the effects of exercise intervention for people with Parkinson's disease. And the reason I pulled this one is it's in a peer-reviewed journal. This is not just a matter of opinion. This is based on an extensive literature review of every paper written about exercise, physical therapy, and Parkinson's disease. And when these meta-analyses are done, meta-analysis means they analyze all of the literature together and they pool the data as best as they can and come up with an overview opinion as to the benefit. So the way it starts is like this. The researcher undertakes a literature search, which is easy to do nowadays with the electronic internet system. It used to be you had to go to the library and take forever to do literature search, and you needed a really good library. If not, you had to order articles from other libraries. The electronic databases are searched, and they have a whole list of them. And then the important thing is they only included studies in which there was a control arm. In other words, people would get the physical therapy, but it would be compared to people who just got standard therapy. In other words, no physical therapy, just standard care, the medications, etc. And then it had a randomly assigned feature to it where in the study, if it's going to be included in this meta-analysis, patients had to be randomly assigned to either exercise program or no exercise. So that would be eligible for inclusion into the meta-analysis. Of course, there are many, many studies of physical therapy that are controlled, placebo controlled and randomly assigned, but this was only, the literature, only this review only included articles in which it was only for Parkinson's disease, not for other neurological conditions. They really looked at the effects of exercise or physical activity intervention compared to with any comparator, only including other forms of exercise, which is interesting. And the paper has to be available in English, otherwise they wouldn't be able to. But most of the papers are available in English. A study was not included if the effects of a non-exercise intervention were evaluated. For example, behavioral interventions, music therapy. And so I'll say they actually found 342 studies in which physical therapy or exercise was examined in the context of Parkinson's disease. About 307 of them, so the majority of them were not included in this analysis because they didn't meet all the inclusion criteria that I just went out. They weren't randomly assigned, they didn't have the right comparator, etc. So there were left only 35 published reports that they thought could be included. And within these, they excluded 21 patient studies because the study design wasn't appropriate, or the paper wasn't in English in 2 of them, and didn't report sufficient data that had only 1 patient or 2 patients. You need to have a certain number of patients. So what was finally done out of these 342 studies, they only pulled together the data from 14 papers. But what comes out of this is very strong evidence for the following, and then we'll get into the kinds of exercises. Let me just find goes on and on. I don't want to bore you too much. So what they found is, oh, come on, what is it? I should have underlined this, but just got it for you. Marilyn gives me homework. She gives me a topic like physical therapy, which I don't usually write about, but I speak about it quite often. So here's what they recommend. That exercise, this is what they found, is effective at improving physical functions and improving the quality of life, in, especially function such as leg strength, balance, and walking. But there's insufficient evidence regarding the effectiveness in fall prevention and the management of depression. So even though we know that exercise can enhance mood, and there's a number of mechanisms, what it really found, these really 14 studies that they finally pulled together, is that yes, definitely you find improvements in leg strength and balance and in walking, but there's no really good evidence that it will prevent falls, which is very disappointing to me because I usually refer people to physical therapy as a way to prevent falls, and that involves improving walking, improving leg strength. So, but it was not quite statistically significant that it prevented falls, but in many patients it would prevent falls. And it didn't improve depression, which for me would have been a side benefit of physical therapy. There's no strong evidence. So that was that paper. I found that despite all of the papers they pulled out, they ended up just including 14 papers and then pulling the data, and they don't arrive at any strong conclusions other than that yes, strength, walking is improved with physical therapy, which is it's a very good thing. So what are some of the exercises that are best? And this is independent of formal physical therapy. This paper that I pulled has to do with people that went to physical therapists and were involved in the studies. It's a physical therapy intervention. Whereas when I talk about exercise, these are things that you can do under the supervision of a personal trainer, at a gym, independently, or under the advice of a physical therapist. So this is the next thing I'm going to talk about, is more broad ideas that you can apply. So what are the best exercises? So there's certainly increasing evidence that aerobic, I'm constantly harping on this to my patient, aerobic exercise, which increases heart rate, blood flow to the brain, is very beneficial. It's probably one of the best exercises you can do. And you recognize that when you're in physical therapy, you don't get the aerobic exercise component, and yet that's one of the most powerful ones. And there's small studies showing that it's effective in basically improving cognition, improving depression, improving motor function in Parkinson's disease. But the other kind of exercise besides aerobic, which could be fast walking, elliptical, cycling, anything that gets your heart rate up, and done, I'll tell you later about how often and for how long you should do these sessions. But there's also a learning-based exercise where you have to learn things to do the exercise, where it isn't just automatic running or cycling. It's a challenge to your mind as well as the body. And we'll talk about some of those learning-based exercises. And they seem to be neuroprotective, these two approaches, learning-based exercise and aerobic exercise. So programs that challenge our heart and lungs, that promote good biomechanics, you know, posture, the way you walk, good posture, trunk rotation, normal rhythm, symmetric movements, are the best ones. Those kinds of exercises. So it would be like walking with good posture at a good clip, a good speed as you monitor your heart rate. Or an elliptical device, which are in most gyms where you hold on to the levers and it's like you're cross-country skiing, your legs are going like that. That's one of the great ones because you have good posture. It is an aerobic exercise, but using all four limbs and some balance. So challenging exercises that challenge the individual to change tempo, activity, or direction. That's what they mean by learning-based. So they also, earlier on, they were talking about dancing is particularly good for decreasing stiffness. But the exercise that challenges the individual to change what they're doing, the tempo or direction, benefits people with Parkinson's disease. Also important, they mention in this article, that keep variety in the exercise activity, because individuals with Parkinson's disease have this difficulty, we all recognize, in changing from one activity to another or performing two activities at the same time. They can't multitask. They can be walking, but they can't chew gum, right, at the same time. You're chewing, it's walking and talking, it's really hard for them to do, to have a conversation while they're walking. They can only either talk or they can walk. But to walk and talk, it's more difficult. So exercises that shift the activity in the middle of it is very helpful. Exercises that require balance and preparatory adjustment of the body are important, along with rhythmic activities, such as dancing, skipping, cycling, can maintain the ability to perform reciprocal movements. So any exercise that promotes attention and learning is beneficial. So what are the types of exercises that do this, that have the kind of characteristics I've described? They have a list of them that many of you probably already do. Walking outside, or in the hot weather here, walking inside a mall. Dancing, yoga classes, Tai Chi classes, stepping over obstacles, marching to music with big arm swings, sports such as volleyball, tennis, golf, ping pong, aerobic classes, or jazzercise classes. Those are the types of exercises that you have to kind of learn to do things. Certainly with the sports, you're doing several things. You're marching, but you're making sure you're forcefully swinging your arms and you're listening to music. What are the exercises that promote cardiopulmonary fitness? And they're very, very good for Parkinson's. So that would be paced walking, that's treadmill walking, at different speeds and different inclines. So you start at a flat incline slow, then you go to a faster rate by adjusting the speed of it, and you increase the incline, so you have to go uphill. So those are challenging, and it's better for Parkinson's disease than just doing the same thing, just walking at the same pace for an hour. It's better to have challenging. Just spend 20 minutes with a treadmill in which you vary the speed and the incline is much better than just walking at a monotonous rate for an hour. It's easier for a patient to walk at a monotonous rate than to be accelerating, changing things, and, but that little extra challenge is beneficial. Swimming is a really good one that they recommend for cardiopulmonary fitness. Swimming with different strokes and with the eyes open and closed not only challenge motor learning but also increase heart rate and good cardiopulmonary conditioning. And they have some treadmills that have body weight support, like a harness over the treadmill, so you have no fear of falling. And for those that have very poor balance, it's a good idea to get on a treadmill with where your body weight is supported, and you get the exercise and you don't run the risk of falling. It facilitates easier coordinated movements for fast walking with a long stride or even jogging. If you know you're not going to fall because your treadmill, it has a harness that suspends you like a parachute in case you fall. Think of exercises that I don't recommend that don't challenge motor planning. Because one thing is to do things, but motor planning is adjusting what you do in the middle of the exercise. So the exercise that doesn't challenge motor planning is just riding a stationary bike without doing any other thing, just a stationary bike. It's not as good, it's not as challenging. Weightlifting, treadmill walking at a low speed. Lap swimming can be very habitual and also automatic. They're good exercises, but they don't challenge the motor planning, which is highly recommended. So all of these exercises are improve endurance, cardiovascular tone, and they can all be enriched. Think of this. How can you enrich? You're sitting on a stationary bicycle and you want to enrich your learning, which is beneficial for Parkinson's disease. So what they say is do those activities where you can by doing a simultaneous activity such as problem solving, singing, watching the news, throwing and catching balls while you're on the stationary bicycle. Have someone throw you a ball, you catch it while you continue. Well, they're trying to make things more interesting, vary up the challenge. Yeah, no way. It doesn't have to be a small ball. It could be like a little volleyball. You're cycling and your partner throws you the volleyball, you catch it, keep on cycling while you catch it. Throw it back. Okay. Or you can open a book and read as you're cycling, or watch a program on TV and get involved in it, or try to solve a problem. Do crossword puzzles as you're cycling. That combination is much better for your Parkinson's disease. So this is actually a good little reminder that people who have Parkinson's disease, who have some difficulty in breathing, shallow breaths, swimming probably is not a comfortable aerobic exercise for them. So swimming would be an appropriate exercise for Parkinson's disease if that individual has a history of being a swimmer, is very familiar with swimming, then it would be a good exercise. But if you haven't swum, very much, and you're not a very good swimmer, it might be a difficult exercise for Parkinson's disease. However, people that have skeletal muscular problems, which invariably we all do, like lower back, knee, hip, would do better in a pool to do some exercises in water, either swimming or doing those aerobic exercises in water, which they do a lot here in Sarasota and Florida. What exercises would make your muscles less stiff, less rigid? Remember, rigidity is one of the key features of Parkinson's disease. So exercise that require large rhythmic movement, that's why the big program, the large steps, large movements is very good. So when you do your exercise, you want to take large movements. So anything that requires a large rhythmical movement through a full range of motion, not just where you really take big steps, you take big movements, big hand openings, instead of, I'm always testing my patients to do this, I want you to do big movements, don't do little movements. Even this is important. The small movements, make them big. They thought, anyway, if you do those large rhythmical movements, it'll decrease muscle rigidity. A program of aerobic music, getting your heart rate up, using music results in reduction of rigidity in 9 out of 10 patients after the exercise program. So exercise with music and take big movements with the music. And it's quite interesting is vibration, rocking, and swinging also decrease. Swinging, I'm not sure what swinging is. I mean, maybe you get on those childhood swings, get back and forth. If you're not prone to dizziness, that might be a good exercise. Get on your backyard swing for your grandchildren, provided it's strong enough to hold you. Things that would help decrease stiffness are really avoiding things, of decreased stress in one's life. Yeah, sure. When should I exercise in relationship to medication? This is actually a very important question. Just use logic. Most things we do have common sense. So, of course, it's better to do exercise when you're on, when you have your best motor function, dopamine is working well. There's no way you can exercise when you're completely off or wearing off. So the good idea is to exercise about an hour after taking levodopa, carbidopa, or the agonist, because then you'll be most mobile, have the best motor function. But that depends on individuals. Some people don't have a clear on and off because it's still early, or they're fortunate enough to have a long-acting dopamine agonist and don't have any off period, so they could exercise almost at any time. So you exercise when you're most mobile would be the ideal time. How often? Another important question. Well, it should be about 4 to 5 times a week. The minimum should be 3 times a week. In other words, every other day. But if you do 4 to 5 times a week, that's ideal. And each time should be 30 minutes to 40 minutes. But I usually tell people 20 to 30 because I don't want to scare them. And most people can do 20 to 30, but they recommend 30 to 40 minutes. And how do you calculate? And what you really want to do, and I tell my patients that I calculate this for them, and I'll give you the formula. You want to get that exercise to increase your heart rate to 80% of maximum for your age. So everyone has a different maximum heart rate, and it gets lower and lower the older you get. So the formula is 220 beats per minute minus your age times 70 or 80%. And that would be the maximum heart rate that you should try to attain for some of the time you're on that treadmill or that you're cycling. And that would be a good cardio aerobic exercise. And they, make the exercise time fun. Well, it's never fun when you first begin, but after a while you can't not do it because you feel weird that I'm missing something. You get dependent. Exercise is addictive because it releases your body's own endorphins, and recently I found it releases the endogenous cannabinoid systems that make you feel good. And that's why people continue to run, is if they don't have their aerobic exercise, they feel down, they feel a kind of withdrawal syndrome, they feel a little anxious, and so they'll find time to exercise even if it's winter in Chicago and snowing. They'll still find the time because otherwise, these are the fanatic exercises. It's because you become dependent on exercise, you get physically dependent because the endorphins are released, and those are your endogenous opiates. It's called a runner's high, and usually you have to push yourself pretty hard to get that. But even if you get your heart rate to 70 to 80% of max 3 or 4 times a week, you're going to be physically dependent on that exercise, and you're going to really enjoy the exercise. You're going to see how much better it makes you feel. So, yeah, the interesting thing is, when do you find time for the exercise? Well, they recommend, and I think it's a very good idea, you integrate your exercise into your everyday activities. You make it like part of what you do. Don't make it like a whole separate event. So what they do, they say stay active and integrate the exercise program into your usual day. And do other kinds of exercises during the day. For example, walk whenever you can instead of driving. It's hard to do in Florida. I mean, obviously this is not meant for us. Where can you walk here instead of driving? I mean, you can walk around your neighborhood, but you're not going to drive around the block in your neighborhood. So, anyway, climb the stairs instead of taking the elevator, if you can, if you still. They also recommend taking 5-minute breaks every 30 minutes when you're exercising. But most of the exercise I recommend is going to be, for 30 minutes, so you won't take a break during those 30 minutes unless you need to. One of the things they say about how to take a break, if you're very ambitious and want to have an hour exercise, then after 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and what they recommend is lifting the arms over your head, performing wall glides, breathing diaphragmatically, taking deep breaths, lower your diaphragm, really deep breaths. Avoid long periods of time watching TV or using a computer. Yeah, anything else? Well, here's what they say. You need a cool down period. It's very important to cool down after an exercise period, especially if you're getting your heart rate to 70–80% of max for your age. Allow yourself a time to cool down. Typically, people with Parkinson's disease need double the time to cool off than someone without it. So if it takes me, usually after I do a 30-minute aerobic run, it takes me 2.5 minutes to get my heart rate back to completely normal, to be cooled off. That's mine. But if I had Parkinson's disease, it would take 5 minutes. So you double the amount of cooling off time with Parkinson's disease. The goals of cooling down is you let your heart rate get back to normal. You allow your muscles time to cool down so they don't become stiff. If you suddenly stop, it's going to be bad. You just gradually ease and cool down. So if I'm walking at a fast clip and I finish, then you keep on walking, but at a very slow level until your heart rate comes down. There's some other things they talk about that are more than just exercise, but there are practice plans. So, for example, learn something new every day. If you listen to the news, talk to people about it, discuss it. Educational programs, watch public television, watch nature, know about those things. Do crossword puzzles, participate in memory training programs. There's a good one called Luminosity, train your brain. Challenge yourself to go out every day. And they recommend practice by writing, exercise your voice. Now, when should you have a referral to physical therapy? All of these things are started at the very beginning, and ideally everyone should be exercising on a regular basis. Well before you get to the age when you develop Parkinson's disease. It's something that unfortunately wasn't as practiced for a while, but now it's kind of the fad to exercise. It's amazing how many runners you see in most cities around the country. It was rare to see people in their running outfits. Now you see it everywhere, and that's a good trend. Here's the thing about physical therapy. When you're first diagnosed, all patients should have a consultation with a physical therapist to establish an appropriate exercise program that's tailored specifically for you. So I haven't been that good at getting everyone to the physical therapist, even if they don't need to leave a dopa, even if they don't need medication. They should have a baseline physical therapy evaluation just so we know where we stand, and then have a plan of exercise suggested by the physical therapist. And I would probably suggest a few things as well. as the illness advances or changes, reevaluations are important. So what I would recommend, either every 1 or 2 years, have another physical therapy visit. I really like this thing, because it's harder to do than the writer of this article suggests. In addition to this physical exercise, everyone should maintain a high level of learning-based exercise to improve the ability to do multiple tasks simultaneously and safely without falling. So this combination of learning-based memory training, aerobic exercise, overground gait practice, and integrative engaging activities in the community are essential for positive health and slowing, despite aging and Parkinson's disease. Are there techniques to help me walk? Well, the therapist really is very good at helping you with that, and it's certain you really want to practice your arm swinging, high, long steps, scanning the environment using visual fixation on an object in the distance, or auditory cues if you have a tendency to freeze as you're going to start counting to yourself so you don't suddenly become immobile. You can sing to yourself or count to yourself or beat a rhythm on your thigh, though it's better if you count almost like you're marching. Thinking about making big steps to clear obstacles on the floor or marching, high steps. So big and high steps to do intermittently is very good. So you're walking, but you're thinking about what you have to do. Imagine there's objects you have to step over. Instead of just walking, you start thinking about your walking. The thing that happens is, it's really unfortunate, is that normally people walk without thinking. That's so programmed, but with Parkinson's disease, the ability to do these automatic movements is compromised. So you kind of have to start thinking, and eventually thinking can be helpful for improving the gait and other motor activities. You have to kind of relearn that. When you're an infant and you learn to turn over and you get up and you sit up and then you take your first steps, all of that stuff becomes completely automatic until we start losing dopamine or develop other lesions in our deep gray structures of the brain. Are there hints to help me get out of bed? Well, practice rolling on your bed, roll back and forth, get in a rhythm, then with some momentum, roll to your right and come to sitting. You might have a dresser near the side of the bed so you could touch the dresser for stability if you need to. Certainly, when you're lying in bed, roll to the side first and then try to sit at the edge of the bed and wait. And then see if you can get up, and you can have, if you have a walker right near the bed, that may be helpful. How about moving around in bed? It's difficult for people to turn in bed in more advanced stages of Parkinson's disease. They have this glamorous approach: wear satin pajamas. Or use satin sheets, but don't do both. You'll get stuck, satin against satin. So have satin sheets, or regular sheets, and satin pajamas. I don't know. What is forced use exercise? And this is very big in people with stroke, where they have a paralysis on one side of their body. And they've learned that if you force the patient, what you do is put the good arm in a sling so they can't use it, and they're forced to use the weak arm. They recover a lot quicker. It's amazing. And the same thing in Parkinson's models. I reviewed a grant that was showing the beneficial, and it's worth describing it in detail, because it's what convinced me about the importance of cardio aerobic exercise in Parkinson's. These monkeys were made Parkinsonian. They had a Parkinson's syndrome. Now, monkeys don't normally get Parkinson's disease. Rhesus monkeys that we were not aware. Perhaps if they lived really a long time, they might have some elements of Parkinson's. But you can't keep these monkeys alive for 30 years, just to see them get Parkinson's late in life. So there's an artificial way to produce Parkinson's disease, and that is injecting a substance that's called MPTP into the carotid artery, of course under general anesthesia. And that substance enters, say, the right carotid artery and accumulates in the basal ganglia and is toxic to dopamine nerves. So over a period of weeks to a month, they develop a full-blown Parkinson's disease on one side of the body predominantly. So it looks a lot. So if you injected it on the right side, the left side becomes tremulous, very rigid, and they no longer can use that side to pick up treats or or food. They rely completely on the good side. So these animals that were randomly assigned to an exercise program versus the couch potato program, where they just did nothing except eat, drink, and sleep. And everything else was the same. They matched the body weights because the other group of animals, the exercise group, were put into a cage that had a treadmill on the bottom. And the whole floor of the cage was a treadmill. And they were put in that for 2 hours. The control animals are put into a similar cage, but the floor didn't move. So the floor starts moving slowly, so the animals got to keep on moving. And gradually, every day, the animal went into this cage. The speed was gradually increased, and the amount of time that the animal was exercised increased from 1 hour to 3 hours. And what I saw videotape of this, and after 6 months, they showed the animals that had been on the exercise program versus those that weren't. And the ones that had been on the exercise program looked completely normal. You could not even see a slight limp. They used both hands, they had no tremor. The animals that had the same degree of Parkinsonism but had no exercise, they still weren't using the left hand. They still had a hard time moving the left side of their body. They still had tremor and rigidity. So that was like dramatic. So well, monkeys, they recover quickly, but exercise has a powerful effect. That's a lot of exercise. Imagine you running 3 hours every day for 6 months. All right, I don't think it can be done, but nevertheless, they wanted to show the maximum effect. They got a completely normal monkey. But was the brains normal? So the animals are euthanized, they're given an overdose, their brains are taken out, and their brains are examined for a number of things. The first thing you look for is how much dopamine do they make? Well, they compare one striatum to the other. The amount of dopamine on both sides of the brain was very similar. The animals had regained the dopamine levels. But the number of neurons in the substantia nigra was still less in the animals, even though they had exercised. But what they saw was those remaining neurons had sprouted and increased the number of synapses and the number of terminals, so that the amount of dopamine was normal. Even though the total number of neurons had been diminished by the toxic agent, the exercise did something to the striatum. And you know what it did? The exercise, in essence, increased fertilizer production. Now, what are the fertilizers for dopamine neurons? There are 2 growth factors. It's called neurotrophic factors. One is called BDNF and GDNF. Remember those, because I'm going to tell you a bit more about them in a moment. And if you go to the cruise, we'll talk more about gene therapy with BDNF and GDNF for Parkinson's. But you won't want to be a volunteer in those studies when you realize you can achieve the same effect as gene therapy involving surgery and viral vectors than the exercise. So here's what they found, that the striatum in the monkeys that had exercise had 3-fold to 5-fold increased levels of those 2 growth factors. And we know from other studies that if you micro-inject those growth factors into animal models of Parkinson's disease, the fibers sprout. But we didn't realize that exercise would do that. It's a powerful, powerful study. The NIH funded this study that led to all kinds of aerobic exercise programs for Parkinson's disease patients. But people are not monkeys, at least most people. No one's a monkey. But they're our cousins, okay? The interesting thing is that before these exercise studies were published, there are a number of researchers that believe that because of what we knew about those growth factors, that you could put those growth factors, the genes for human BDNF, the gene for human GDNF, those are naturally produced growth factors. But for some reason in Parkinson's disease, their production diminishes and diminishes. That's why you lose the nerve fibers and then eventually the neurons. So they thought, well, what if we increase the production of those growth factors by putting the gene for those growth factors into the striatum? And that's called gene therapy. You've heard of gene therapy. Well, this is one of the approaches of gene therapy for Parkinson's. But you can't get a gene into the brain to where it's needed by giving it into the bloodstream. You have to inject it directly into the brain. But the gene can't get into neurons unless you put it into a virus that has been gutted. So they take a virus that has been modified and they insert the human DNA into that virus, and then they micro-inject that virus into the striatum. And that virus infects those striatal neurons, and there the gene is expressed to make BDNF, and so you get big production of GDNF and BDNF. So that study has had a number of setbacks. This is human gene therapy for BDNF and GDNF. And needless to say, I don't think any of you would volunteer for that study, knowing that if you exercise, you can get very similar effect. However, there are some people who rather have surgery because we idolize the surgeons. We think they're the god at the top of the pyramid. In reality, I tell this, I like to remind them, there are any surgeons in the audience before I insult them? Okay. The surgeons, even in England, they're not called doctor. They're still called mister. The surgeons were descended from the Barbers Guild. You know, they were service people that were really good at cutting things. You know, they cut beards, they cut moles off your face, they cut little tumors out of your face and body. And the barbers were brought in to be surgeons during war. They helped amputate people, and they had very sharp instruments. And so, you know, eventually they got more sophisticated and they formed a surgeons guild. But surgeons are always technicians. And the advances in surgery are due to the advances in science and pharmacology, not to the techniques of the surgeons. So there's no need to worship the surgeon. The surgeon needs to have a sang-froid. He can't be upset by blood. He has to be detached. And therefore won't be good with patients. Because the nature of a surgeon is not to be emotionally involved so that you can do your task and stop the bleeding, you know, tie off the vessel, remove the tumor, and then you go back to your doctor. So it's not that my brother's a surgeon. So I can freely say that we are very different in personality. He loves using his hands. He saved a life, but he doesn't want to take care of him any longer. That's your job. You know? So I don't like to recommend people for surgery, and certainly gene therapy is a surgical approach right now. But we're developing, okay, why did the surgeons get so glamorized? You know, they did heart transplants. Well, the transplants were being done in the 19th century. The problem is nothing survived. Why, you know, and surgery in the days before general anesthesia was pretty nasty business. You had to cut quickly and drink a lot of brandy to put you out of it. But with the development of the ether, people could go under, and the surgeon could take his time and had a much better success rate in removing a limb or cutting out a big tumor, because that's the kind of things they did. Or putting pins into the bone of a compound fracture. They could do that with ether. So the surgeons moved up a big notch because they started being successful. But who discovered it were the early pharmacologists and physicians, right? The next step is, okay, now they could take their time and do beautiful work. They did kidney transplants and heart transplants. But two things would happen. Infection killed the people, because there are no antibiotics then that worked. And secondly, the immune reaction, that foreign tissue would be rejected. So it wasn't until antibiotics came into development. First were the sulfonamides and the certain organic dyes, but they weren't really effective. It wasn't until the modern era of antibiotics with penicillins and these streptomycin type drugs and newer generations of antibiotics allowed the surgeon to take his time and to even be messy and sloppy, because figured the antibiotics would protect. Even then, people still get infections, but still they're less likely. And it wasn't until immune suppressant drugs were discovered, and the immune system and how it works, again, that's not discovered by surgeons, nor were the antibiotics. There were us humble pharmacologists. Believe me, I have big enough ego, I shouldn't call myself humble, but generally we don't get the glory that the surgeons get. Certainly they don't pay us as much. We're not the boss, it's always the surgeon. The deans always have surgeons as part of their executive committee. Why? Because they bring in the most money to the medical school. And money, like they say at my university, the jocks and the docs run the whole university. The jocks, because they bring a lot of money to the university. That's why there's big football and basketball. It's amazing how much money comes from alumni, from the sports. And then the big cash cow at most universities is the medical school. Because the money that they collect goes to support a lot of the university. So therefore, executives often are surgeons that the president's administration have because they know how to bring in money and they manage a lot of money. I'm digressing, I always do when I bring up surgery. But I have to tell you, I'm getting the newer generation of surgeons, they're doing things on a smaller scale. It's not as crude, in other words, with microelectrodes and deep brain stimulation, and it's miniaturizing and developing more interface between computers and processes. I think that surgery is going to advance dramatically in terms of treating brain disorders. As soon as we get a little better at developing the right interfaces between the hardware we put into the brain and the software that regulates what's going on in the brain. So right now, we have electrodes that are going constantly to stop motor fluctuations in Parkinson's, deep brain stimulation. But ideally, what you want those things to fire in response to a signal that is picked up by electrodes, goes into the interface to the computer and back. And so it's more regulated and more automatic, and it'll result in better control. So that's where the surgery, I think, will improve. I brought up the exercise and the surgery is that because I think exercise is a much better way to go for enhancing neurogenesis. And I didn't even mention the fact that it not only improves the amount of dopamine, but also improves the number of new neurons born in the hippocampus, which is usually not a concern for most people with Parkinson's disease. But as we age, our short-term memory is less, and it's because we don't make enough of the new neurons in the hippocampus. Well, exercise has also been shown, and we actually published a paper in mice. We had Alzheimer's mice that failed to navigate a water maze. It's very difficult for them to learn it compared to the sibling mice that don't have Alzheimer's. And what we did was we gave exercise opportunities to the mice, to the Alzheimer's mice. And they were able to learn the maze much better. And that correlated with the increased generation of new neurons in the hippocampus. And this is just by having exercise and an enriched environment. So a lot of mouse toys. They're little, colorful things that they would move around, and compared to a barren kind of prison cell, they're just like most mouse cages. So let me see how I can finish up. So there's a lot of different exercises that you could do. If we had to rank them, I think the most important ones are those that increase cardio aerobic conditioning. Basically get your heart rate up. And there are different ways to do that. And the second most important is to do learning-based exercises where you have a little bit of a cognitive challenge where you do several things at the same time. That can be tricky, and you should probably do that with the advice of a physical therapist. The other component of the exercise you should do would be those that enhance balance. So Tai Chi and yoga, as an example, would be very good. And just the dancing exercises are also ranked very high. And I know some of these things we do here, every one of these kinds of activities you can do at Parkinson Place. And so I think you were coming to the right place. I'll take any questions before I end it here. I have just a few questions.
I want to ask you about the Feldenkrais method or Alexander method.
I know a little bit about them, and I think it would probably be effective. And a lot of it has to do with correct posture. And certainly the Alexander method. I have a little book that's about 40 years old that someone gave me that I never read completely. It's about the Alexander method. But I remember getting the gestalt that it was about posture, correct posture with every activity. There's a correct posture for sitting, correct posture for rising, correct posture for all of these things. What I always ask yoga instructors, what is the correct posture for sleep? I never got a good answer. You know what they told me? You lie on your back on the floor with your rear end up against the wall and your feet straight up. So you're like on your back. And I said, you sleep the whole night? No, that's just to induce sleep. And I said, well, how can you then, from there, you get real sleepy, crawl back into bed? She said, well, you could have the mattress on the floor. Anyway, I never got a good answer about the correct posture for sleep, but I think any posture allows you to sleep well is what you should use. I don't know what the correct posture for sleep. I remember when I was a neurology resident, there was a patient named Gertrude Inelo who had written a number of books way back. She was a pioneer. She wrote them in the 30s. And she was in her 80s when I saw her in 1980. And she had gotten very well known for writing about posture and exercise to maintain health and cognition. And she had a whole section on sleeping postures. And generally, when you are on your side, you do better to have your heart above. So lying on the right side is somehow what she recommended. And when you shift to the left side, you don't stay on the left side as long as on the right side. Don't ever lie on your belly, because then your neck has to be strained too much. Don't use huge pillows. Try to keep the spine straight, just slightly elevated. And then there's all kinds of variations about sleep posture that have to do with whether you have orthostatic hypotension. You get dizzy when you stand up. In that case, you should sleep at 30 degrees elevated, 30 to 45 degrees. But generally, sleeping flat with not huge pillows is a good idea. Sleeping on the side is good because if you have any secretions, they go out the side, you're not inhaled. So sleeping on the side is the preferred posture. Though no one sleeps on one side the whole night, unless you have Parkinson's disease. They're known for sleeping like a log. They take one posture and then they don't shift the whole night. And that's not good either. That's why you have the satin sheets or the satin pads. So you slip around. Okay, I got to get ready for the clinic, so thank you.